So clicking these does indeed update state, and that does make it down to chat because it's able to change chat heading, and it changes this in message list. But even though we say this.props.room.name here, it's not doing the right thing. Why isn't it doing the right thing? Yeah. Well, so my room prop should change every time I click a new link, right? Yeah. So it's going to change from general to random or whatever, but I'm still seeing the same list of messages.
Because it's still the same array of messages.
Why is it still the same? Why?
Because you only have one array of messages.
But I changed what I'm syncing with. Anybody know? Was anybody able to diagnose the problem but not fix the problem? Yeah.
So the way that did mount works, that calls before you render, correct? That's only the initial render?
Right. So component did mount runs when the component first loads. It runs render for the first time, then we start syncing, and then we know that if our props change or our state changes, render gets run again, right? Component did mount does not get run again. So it's never going to call sync state with the updated prop because it only runs once when the page first mounts. So yeah, we change rooms, but we're still syncing the other thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And for some reason they would be called still. Like I would change states and then the console log within.
If whatever you're changing actually causes main to unload and reload again, then it'll run again. But that shouldn't happen every time state changes at all. Let's do console.log testing. Here's console log testing. I click these, it does not say testing again. So we're not calling console did mount. So this is expected. That's how did mount is supposed to work. When we looked in the documentation yesterday for lifecycle functions, so hopefully, I mean, if you're trying to address this, if you remember that component did mount only runs then, how did we even find out about component did mount in the first place? It's a lifecycle method, right? So there are other lifecycle methods. Let's find out what they are. Here's our little overview. Here's the component lifecycle. So here's a diagram as a cheat sheet. So when we're mounting, the constructor is the first thing that runs, then render runs, then component did mount. When you're making an update, because we got new props, or we called set state, or we forced an update, it calls render, and then it calls component did update. So it'll call component did update after it gets new props and so on. So looking in here, we see component did mount, invoked immediately after a component is mounted. Component did update is invoked immediately after updating occurs. It is not called for the initial render. So I think we're going to have to do it both places. So component did update is just another lifecycle method that's defined in our superclass. So throw in component did update. And we basically want to do this again. So instead of writing it twice, I'm going to extract this into another method. Yeah.
That's why I did accept the lifecycle method I used. It's called component will receive props.
Component will receive props. That's another one. If you look in the documentation, I used to use that. It actually says, where can you find that? Component will receive props. I'm not finding it on this page anymore. But if you find it in the documentation, it'll tell you it's deprecated and not to use it anymore. It's still there, but they're renaming it to have unsafe in the name. So it will break probably in the next release, or at least in React 17 it will. So they recommend not using it anymore. So yeah, that's another one. So we use component did update. We're going to do this again, so I'll extract this into another method. I'll call it sync messages. Just put exactly that in there. So then in component did mount, we'll call it this.sync messages. And in component did update, we'll call this.sync messages. So how does component did update work? Okay, it receives the previous props in the previous state and a snapshot, and it's invoked immediately after updating occurs. So if your props change, you will receive the old props as an argument, so you can compare them. So what we could do, make sure the room actually changed, because we have more than one prop coming in here, and we have state. Any number of things could cause component did update to run, and we don't want to start syncing with Firebase anew every single time, only if the room actually changed. So I could say if prevprops.room.name not equal to this.props.room.name. Incredibly, we have made it to the end of the second week, and this is the first time we've used a comparison operator. So you'll notice there's an extra equal sign there. You know about the whole triple equal thing in JavaScript? So we generally use 3 equal signs instead of 2 equal signs in JavaScript, because 2 equal signs, when used for comparison, does automatic type conversion in JavaScript, which can be really unexpected and super confusing. So it's always recommended to use triple equal instead. If you actually want it to not care about the type, do the type conversion yourself, be explicit about it, instead of relying on that automatic behavior, because it's just weird. It's not how other languages work. The number 4 should not equal the string 4. So use triple equal, which means that for things like not equal, you use an extra equal sign. So I'm saying is not exactly equal to that other string. So if the rooms aren't the same, then I will call sync messages again. This.sync messages. Now what happens? Here I am in S2 afternoon. Let's switch to general. Random. Hang on. Why is it, I'm confused too. This shouldn't be working yet. Really?
Yeah, send a message.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened.
General? Aha. There we go. So I add another one. Wait, what? So if you look in your database, here we go. Here's the S2 afternoon room. Where am I? This isn't food. Random. Where am I? This isn't food. General. Yeah. So now every time I do anything, it's the same. It's the same one every time. I'm updating every single room with everything I type. So by golly, it does start syncing with the new room, doesn't it? It just doesn't stop syncing with the others. So which thing do you think we need to learn more about? Say that again. So we need to learn more about how sync state works, right? Because that's the thing that isn't behaving the way we want. This has nothing to do with React at this point. We start syncing, we keep calling sync state with a new room, and it starts syncing with that. It just doesn't stop syncing with what we were already syncing with. So I think we need to learn more about how sync state works. So that's from Rebase, right? And I have the Rebase README still open to sync state because we were there yesterday. And realistically, if I'm using a new node module in my project, I am probably actually going to leave that tab with the README open for a while until I'm sure I don't need it anymore. And then I just end up reopening it anyway because I haven't figured it all out yet. So let's see what we know here. Purpose allows you to set up two-way data binding between your component state and your Firebase and never to stop. Arguments, endpoint, and options. Return value, an object which you can pass to remove binding if you want to remove the listener while the component is still mounted. Oh, indeed. So that returns something super useful. An object which you can pass to remove binding if you want to remove the listener while the component is still mounted. So that tells me a couple things. For one thing, it tells me that probably if I unmount that component, it does stop syncing. So it doesn't do it forever. But we can make it stop listening if we want to using the return value of sync state. So it's going to return something that I can pass to remove binding. So we should do something with the return value. So I'll call this rebase binding. I don't know what this object is. It just says an object. And probably we should store this in state so we can access it again later. So I'll add rebase binding to state, and I'll just start it as null. I didn't put a trailing comma there earlier, and I almost forgot to put one now. That's why I always put it there. There we go. Rebase binding. So get the return value, call this dot set state, pass in rebase binding. So then, when I call sync messages, I'll check if that's already there. If this dot state dot rebase binding, because when I first load, when I call it from component did mount, it'll be null, right? And null is falsy. But if it's there, what do I want to do? An object which you can pass to remove binding. So where would you expect remove binding to be? On base, right? It's base.sync_state, so base.remove binding, there it is. Clean up a listener. Listeners are automatically cleaned up when components unmount, as we suspected. However, if you wish to remove a listener while the component is still mounted, this will allow you to do that. An example would be if you want to start listening to a new document or change a query on all collections in response to a prop change. That sounds like us. So we'll call base.remove binding this.state.rebase binding. So if we're already syncing with something else, stop syncing with something else. Okay. General? Random? Pancakes? Now that's what I call food. Look at that. We've got separate rooms. Does this still work if we'd like change users? Who am I right now? I'm oh, I don't even have a name. Log out. B at b.com. Oh yeah. S2 afternoons where I started because that's what's hard coded into main. Cheesecake. Nice. We got it. Ship it. Sync each room's messages separately. Get it? Yeah. What's up?
So what's the problem earlier?
Which one? We had a few problems.
How does it know when to load the messages from Firebase? Is it like
It's when we call. Well, what do you mean? Like when they change? How does it do the changes?
yeah?
I suspect it's using sockets. It's using web sockets. I assume that's how Firebase works under the hood. But when we use sync state, magic.